Welcome to the Lit Mom Podcast, your go-to source for bite-sized literacy tips and tricks. Join me as we explore evidence-based strategies, techniques, and resources that promote strong reading and writing skill development. Get ready to empower your family with the knowledge and tools to navigate the world of structured literacy and unlock limitless potential. Welcome to the second episode of Season 2 of the Lit Mom Podcast. I'm your host, Dev, and in this episode, I'm going to be discussing what decodable texts are and how they can be a game changer for families working with their child at home to develop their reading skills. Before we start this episode, I would like to first acknowledge the traditional territory in which I reside on. I reside on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people, which includes the Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. As part of the Lit Mom podcast, I would like to share about the Moccasin Identifier Project. I encourage you to check it out, whether you're an educator. They have educational resources and lessons that you can be using in your classroom. It's also really great learning for families at home with your children, but it is an initiative that was developed by Carolyn King in partnership with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and the Greenbelt Foundation. The purpose of this initiative is to promote public awareness connected to cultural, historic sites and the ancestral presence of First Nation, Métis, and Indigenous communities. So let's start off this episode by really understanding what decodable texts are and how they can be used at home to support your child in developing their reading skills, especially early on. And so decodable texts are something that we want to use when we are practicing specific phonics skills, but they are not something that students are going to be using forever. So right now we see them often in kindergarten, grade 1. They can be used in grade 2 as well. But what we want to see is that children are going to start to transition to more authentic text because they're going to have a bigger knowledge base of different letter sound pairings so that they're able to decode more complex text or passages. Eventually, all books are going to be decodable because we have cracked the code and we understand the various letter sound pairings that we may come across in the English language. Decodables use a controlled set of phonetically regular words. And when I say phonetically regular words, all I mean is that based on the most common letter sound pairings that they've been taught, again, remember we started with the most simple or basic ones to get into more complex. Those words are going to be decodable because they have an understanding of when they see a specific letter, it is going to spell a specific sound. So when I see the letter M in print, I know that it's going to spell M. Or when I see the letter T, I know it's going to spell T. We also like to start with short vowel sounds because those are the ones that are most commonly seen. And then we move on to more complex letter sound pairings. So decodables allow for students to take the skills that they have been explicitly taught, those phonics patterns, and see them in reading and practice that building of being automatic. When I see specific letters, they're associated with certain sounds. So I'm going to be able to blend those sounds together to read the words in front of me. So unlike level text, which use a mixture of high frequency words and sight words, decodable texts focus on specific phonics skills from a scope and sequence, again, going from the most simple to more complex letter sound pairings that a child is going to be exposed to through phonics instruction. Level texts are books that I know I previously used in the classroom. It was something that I was taught in Teachers College to be the best way to teach reading. Obviously now we know better, so we need to do better, but the texts were often set up in a way where students needed to look at the picture to try and figure out what they are reading about because the words were often too complex, whether the phonics patterns were too complex or they were multisyllabic words, and students didn't have the skill set yet to effectively decode the text because they're kindergarten, they're grade 1, they're just beginning to develop those skills. And instead, when we ask them to memorize a word, it makes it really hard when they come across a new word or unknown word to actually transfer over skills based on memorization of other words. So these books were predictable. They have a lot of repetition in them. So you might see these where it's I can see a tiger. I can see a parrot. So they can get the repetition of the first couple of words, but then they're going to have to guess, look at the picture to try and figure out the last part of the sentence. And that's not an effective way for us to teach reading. So this is something that we previously used in classrooms. So you might be wondering, why are decodable texts such a valuable resource for families that have budding readers at home? And so I'm going to break it down and give you a few different reasons why they can be such a valuable resource for you to be using when we talk about spending some time at home practicing literacy skills to develop specifically reading at this time. So, firstly, decodable texts allow for children to have the opportunity to practice using their phonics skills and knowledge that they have developed in a meaningful context. As they encounter predictable patterns and those phonics patterns that they have been explicitly taught, they are going to be able to sound out the words independently with confidence, and it's going to reinforce the skills and knowledge base that they are developing between the letter and sound pairings. As children successfully decode words and read sentences fluently, they are building up their confidence in their ability to tackle words that are unknown to them. And so this is going to set them up for greater success, especially when we want for them to be able to independently read and be able to read to learn. Research has noted that students who start out by learning to memorize words, so this again is when we look at those predictable or level texts, when they have had to work on memorizing words, it may appear like they are reading at a quicker pace or progressing at a quicker pace. But what happens is they typically hit a wall when they start to have more complex words, multisyllabic words in their reading that they don't know how to read because you can't transfer the skill of memorization over to an unfamiliar word. Whereas our students that are going to be working really hard in the very beginning to understand letter sound pairs, working on decoding those, focusing on the words in front of them and learning those phonics patterns, they may appear to be starting their reading journey at a slower pace. However, they're not going to hit that wall later on in those later grades. They're going to have a greater success with approaching words that are going to be more challenging, that are new and unfamiliar to them. So this is why it's really important that we are practicing those decoding skills and strategies where we're focusing on words, and decodable text allows for students to have that opportunity to be practicing putting that into play. So we used to provide levels when we talk about a student's ability to read. Even starting in kindergarten, we started with a level AA or 0 and worked our way through the alphabet as they got more complex when we look at number of words in the text or the words being used in the text. And so a level doesn't tell us anything about what a child actually needs support with when we talk about reading. It doesn't tell us the phonics pattern that they need support with. It doesn't tell us specifically what irregular words they may be having trouble with and need extra support with. So decodable texts are going to offer us a clear picture of which phonics patterns do they need feedback on, do they need time practicing, because it should be text that they have had exposure to explicit instruction on those phonics patterns, again, following the most simple to complex skills. And so this is something that admittedly, our son came home with leveled text as part of his reading program in kindergarten, and we didn't read them because we knew that he was getting frustrated. He did not enjoy the task of reading. He would avoid it. And obviously, I think it was a very valid reaction given that every time he would say a letter, the sound associated with the letter, and try and blend it together, we would tell him he was wrong, or we would give him that correction of what the word actually was. And so it wasn't a fun experience, and it sure didn't support developing his confidence. Whereas with decodables, he was successful. He was able to apply the skills that he was learning in class at home, and he was pulling it together with reading. So it's really great opportunity for your child to see that they are capable of reading, even if they're looking at letters and just recognizing the letters spell specific sounds in the beginning or single words, those CVC short words. They're reading, they're pulling those sounds together. to read. And so we want to celebrate those things with our children. In the beginning, it may appear like they are giving everything very slow, like a sloth we talk about, where if the word was pet, they might go et pet, and they'd have to go back and blend it. And it's just showing that they need more practice and time, making sure that it's more automatic than when they recognize a letter within a word, that they automatically know the sound that they're going to pair with it. Or if it's a vowel, they know that they have that set variability where if the sound doesn't make sense when they're blended together, they can try a different sound. But again, they need the practice over and over again of reading out loud, decoding words for it to become automatic. And so it's not going to be easy at first because it's such a challenging concept for students to learn without that practice time. Now, for the remainder of this episode, I would like to share different ways that families can support using decodable text at home. I want to offer a bunch of different free resources that you can check out that have decodable texts and passages. I will show a few options that are ones that you can purchase, but there are so many free resources available out there that I don't recommend that you have to go and purchase any of these. So I want to make sure that that is very clear, knowing that we have access to many decodable texts and passages. Tip number one, I recommend that you connect with your child educator or educators and just check in and see what maybe phonics pattern are they practicing. If you know that they're using UFly, again, the scope and sequence is accessible online. So if they tell you a specific phonics pattern, you can quickly get a feel for which ones have already been covered so that you can go and grab those decodable text options or the roll and read game. But it's always good to get a little bit of a feel for where your child is at with their explicit phonics instruction in school. It helps to know so that you're not going to give them text that is overly complicated. Again, if we go too far down the scope and sequence with the phonics patterns that we're expecting children to know, if they haven't covered them, then again, they're going to start to guess. They're not going to be sure, which isn't going to help with that confidence. So see if you can connect with educators and see what phonics patterns they are working on. And it will give you that quick little snapshot of different patterns that you might be able to focus on with your child at home. Or if you are reading decodables with them and they're able to read them really quickly, then maybe you move on and try one that is more complex or challenging. It's not going to hurt your child to be reading text that is easier for them if it helps to give them that practice, that oral reading practice, for you to figure out where they might be sitting with their reading and the best fit for practicing those skills. Another great way to support children with their decoding is to encourage that letter sound correspondence, making sure that they have lots of opportunity for when we say a word, that they are able to connect the sounds that they hear back to specific letters. So this is a really great opportunity. Again, writing really helps and coding helps students with their reading, because the skill is having them really think about, well, I hear a specific sound, what letter spells that sound or represents that sound, which is going to also help and transfer into their reading. So we want to give them that opportunity, but it just helps for them to pause and think about, okay, if I'm hearing a specific sound, what letter comes to mind to spell that sound? This can be done anywhere. If you're at a grocery store, if you're watching TV and words come up, you can pause it and say, oh, I just heard the sound S at the beginning of the word sun. What do you think I'm going to use to spell that? Or if there's simple words in movement breaks, if you ever do videos like that at home or in school, there are ones that often say run, jump, duck, dodge. They can start to recognize and encourage them to decode those words when they're doing those activities. Again, we're giving them that real life opportunity to be decoding and not just expecting that they're going to guess what's coming next. Something that often comes up is the concern that decodable texts are boring. And this is something I think that as adults, we seem to forget that what's boring to us is not necessarily boring to children. And so when we're giving children these passages with no pictures, no, in the very beginning, the storyline is not overly exciting and it's very basic, you can still bring in questions to ask about who the characters are, what are they doing, and have them have conversations and make those comprehension ties to decodables, but we want for students to be able to decode effectively because decoding is going to influence how fluently they can read. Again, remember how I said if a child is individually giving each sound before they blend the word together, they're moving way too slow to read fluently, which we know fluency is key for comprehension. We need to be reading at a reasonable pace and understanding the words that we're reading to comprehend what we read. So if we're focusing on decodables, please just know that you're working to build that decoding. You can tie in comprehension questions by asking them about the story. It might not seem super thrilling or like a cliffhanger, but it's meeting the needs of our early readers and that decoding practice. It's not going to be the only thing that we ever do to build comprehension. Another suggestion is to always celebrate the progress that you notice your child is making. This is going to help build their confidence. It's going to reassure them that the practice and the time they're spending reading decodable text with you is worth it and they're getting further along in their journey to becoming independent and successful readers. And so we want for them to have that from families and that support so that they're excited to engage in reading with you. And it is often a nice refresher as a parent to think about where your child has started with just learning letters and the sounds that go with them to that moment when they are going to give you the individual sounds and then blend them together to being able to recognize and read words more fluently. It's always a really exciting journey to be a part of and get the opportunity to share in with your child. So make sure you celebrate the progress that is happening. You may be wondering now, when can we start to transition out of using decodable text at home and start to use more authentic text for our children to be reading to ensure that they're still going to develop those skills of fluency, of comprehension, of vocabulary, but they're able to decode successfully on their own. So it is really key that we are sitting with our children, we are listening to them read so that we can monitor the progress that they're making. We can offer the feedback regularly when they're making errors. But what you want to look for, there are a few key things to keep an eye out for that might tell you that your child is ready to move away from decodable text. Things that I recommend looking for is that they're able to consistently decode unfamiliar words because they have a stronger foundation of phonics patterns that they have been explicitly taught and had the opportunity to practice. So even though the words are words that they haven't seen before, they're able to independently decode them successfully. Another thing to keep an eye on is, are they increasing the way that they are reading in regards to their fluency? Is it coming off more naturally like they're having a conversation? Are they reading with more expression? This is maybe another indicator that it is time to move from that decodable text to a more authentic text or picture book, early reader, chapter book for your child. And of course, that comprehension. Do they understand what they are reading? They're not reading and racing through it at a pace that is too fast to actually understand what they are reading. And the last one that I like to consider is, are they able to independently decode multisyllabic words? So these may have all of those phonetically regular sounds that they associate with those beginning simple phonics patterns, but are they able to read words that are much more lengthy than a single syllable word and decode those independently? Remember that the goal of using decodable text is to build that strong foundation of phonics and decoding skills. As children grow as readers, they're going to explore a wider range of texts, passages, and books, and they're going to continue to be able to apply that phonics knowledge that they have developed early on through practice with decoding. Before I share all of the different decodable texts and resources that you can find online to be using at home, I will share a few options that I have purchased. If you are looking for different books at home, I have purchased them through Amazon most times. But again, there are Bob books. Bob books come in different sets. These are really great decodables to have at home as an option. Again, the pictures are very basic. They're very simple, but again, we're not using the pictures when we're practicing reading, so we don't want to spend so much time focusing on the pictures, but actually on the words and getting in that decoding practice. So I find these ones are really good. They focus on simple phonics patterns and get more complex as we go. So these are ones that we used with Emerson at the very beginning of his reading stages. Another one that he enjoyed is the Yak Pack. So these are comics. Again, he was very avoidant to reading. We were trying to find any possible type of text that was decodable for him to practice reading. So we've tried all the things. So there are different series of the Yak Pack. They have some images, but the images have words underneath. So they're still going to be doing that decoding piece. But if your kiddo is interested in comics, I think these are about $15 on Amazon. So we have these two at home that Emerson was using when he was working on short vowel sounds and other components as well. Okay, so now to get to those free resources that you can access online to support with decoding and reading at home. So you can maybe have these on an iPad, your phone, a computer. If you're able to print them, then that's great too. But I know that's not always an option. But this one is free. These are the decodables that are part of the UFly Foundations. I know that some educators do send these home to families to practice reading. So I think this is a really great resource. There's no pictures for children to be looking at for guessing. They really have to look at the words and decode based on their understanding of phonics patterns that they have been explicitly taught. So this is a really simple resource for decodables, nothing fancy about it, but it does the trick. Another one is the UFly roll and read. So this is just single words, but again, it's getting them to practice that decoding. So if your child is really working on being more automatic with blending all of the sounds together to read, here's a fun game that you can use. Again, it's part of UFly and you can pair it with those phonics patterns if you know which ones your child has been explicitly learning about in school. Another option is what's called Phonics Play Comics. And so they have these little comic book style decodables. So this one's I Can Spot, and it talks about different fish. Again, very simple words for decoding. But if your child enjoys looking at that comic format, this is one that maybe you want to check out. I always recommend pre-reading it to make sure that you feel comfortable with what the content is. As an educator, it's something we do regular in the classroom and something that we should still continue to do at home. Another one is there are decodables through Starfall. So Starfall was recommended as an option for games and activities last episode. They also have different decodable text for free that you can download. So again, you can look at on any type of device or print for that extra practice. But there's a variety of stories available through Starfall. And another one is SiliSense. So SiliSense is a series that I have purchased myself. Again, being in the classroom, I purchased this series using it with Emerson, but it is costly. So it's one that I'm not recommending that parents and families go out and buy the physical copies of. But the beauty of SiliSense is they actually have available on their website what looks like this. They are printable. There's no pictures, so we can tie in that comprehension. They are going to draw a picture to match the words that they read, but it has text on the pages. They're identical to the stories that I've purchased, but they just don't have images. So again, another option for decodables. Emerson really enjoys the SiliSense books. So this is just another free option that you might want to look into. A final decodable text that I'm going to share is Flyleaf. So Flyleaf Publishing has allowed for free access again this year to students and families for their series of decodable readers. And so these were a really big hit in our grade 1 classroom last year. Students loved these books to the point of if I put one back in the reading room, they would ask me where that book went because they love to sit and read the books with a partner or by themselves. So you can access them for free online. You can just have them on your iPad and digitally flip through them. They can't be printed, but it's just one of those extra options to check out because your child might enjoy the variety of decodable texts that are out there. When we consider decodable text or reading at home, it is okay to have your child read a text multiple times. Repeated reading is going to help benefit them in becoming more fluent, in recognizing those unfamiliar words that maybe the first time they read the text, they had errors in how they were reading them. But you'll start to see that what happens when they read it the first time versus the third time is going to show that progress that is transferable to other new texts. So it's worth getting a decodable text and having your child read it up to 3 times to you and just make it a thing and explain that The reason we do this is so that it becomes easier and more fluent when we're reading it because we've seen it more than one time. It's a conversation that we have had with Emerson. He is now used to me handing him a book multiple times before we go and pick a new one. The final book that I would like to share today, of course, is a new picture book that I recently picked up. Again, I was at a conference and it was really wonderful to be able to participate in a session that talked about those who are introverts can still lead. So when we think of our kiddos, when we think of students in our classroom who may be quieter, I think that this was a really great book to pick up and share. It's called The Path by Bob Stacky. And so this book talks about, sure, there is going to be a well-worn path because many people have walked it before you. It doesn't mean you have to take the same path. So I think it's a really great book. Lots of great conversations can happen through a read aloud with this book, whether at home or in the classroom. So one that I recommend checking out if you're looking for a new picture book to add to your collection. With that in mind, that is the end of episode 2 of season 2 of the Lit Mom podcast. I hope that today's episode has been valuable, that there are some resources and decodable text that you're going to check out so that you can engage in some reading at home with your child to get them reading more fluently on automatically, because they get the opportunity to decode words and use those skills in a real life, authentic way. In episode 3, we are going to spend some time talking about games. I think it's important that at home we find fun ways to bring in that literacy practice, but with different games that you can play. So it's going to be a little bit of a different pace in that I'll spend 15 minutes talking about some different activities that you can do at home and what skills they might focus on if you're looking for a different way to approach having that time for your child to practice developing those foundational literacy skills at home. Until next time, I'm your host, Dev. This is the Lit Mom podcast, where we bring literacy tips and tricks straight to your headphones. As always, keep learning, keep listening, keep growing.